Hi there, and welcome to the Salt and Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. And today we're gonna make a traditional pound cake in the Ninja Foodi. This is super easy, it's so delicious, and it takes a fraction of the time that it would in the oven or even baked in the Ninja Foodi, because we are going to pressure cook this pound cake. And I know some of you don't like pressure cooked cakes, and I'm kind of with you on that one, although I have a delicious recipe for an apple cake that's pressure cooked that I'll link to right up there. That is absolutely delicious. But traditional cakes under pressure sometimes get this weird texture. So in a little bit, I'm gonna go over all my trials and errors of cooking the pound cake in the Ninja Foodi. I baked it a couple times, I pressure cooked it a couple times, and I came up with the perfect formula. So let's get started with mixing up our butter and our sugar. This is a very important step. So what I want you to do when you're measuring out your ingredients, if at all possible, weigh them out, okay? This is a simple recipe with just a few ingredients. So if you're a little off on one, it can make a difference in the end result. So I have, we're gonna make, like I said, a traditional pound cake. So let me back up real quick about what is a pound cake. Well, a pound cake is a pound of butter, a pound of flour, a pound of sugar, and a pound of eggs traditionally. Okay, that's how it used to be made. Now there's tons of variations on the internet. I've made several of them over my lifetime, never been happy. So I thought, let me go back to just the traditional measurements and keep it pretty simple. But we're gonna use just a half a pound of all the ingredients because we're gonna put it in a round ring pan and pressure cook it in the Ninja Foodi, and a full-size batter would overflow, it would be too much. So we're gonna cut everything in half. So I have a half a pound of sugar that I did measure out. Actually gonna scrape it, I'm gonna make sure I get all of it out. Now you can use a stand mixer for this, it makes it super easy, but if you don't have one, you can always use a hand mixer, and you can do this by hand, but it's gonna take quite a bit of arm muscle because you really need to get the butter and the sugar whipped up quite a bit. It needs to be light and fluffy, and I'll show you the consistency that it should be when we're done. This is a half a pound of butter going in. Now the butter is room temperature. The eggs are room temperature as well. And if you want to make this and you forget to take your eggs out like I always do, in fact, I always forget my butter and my eggs, you can put the eggs in a little warm water bath, you know, for about 15 minutes and they'll come to room temperature. I also put my sticks of butter into a little plastic baggie, zip it up and stick it in the same warm water bath. But be careful, because if the water's too hot, it will melt your butter and that will have an effect on the end result. So you don't want melted butter for this recipe, just room temperature. Okay, so we've got the butter and the sugar in there. I'm gonna turn the stand mixer on and we're gonna let this go for quite some time. And I'll show you exactly the consistency of the butter and the sugar when we're done. So after about 30 seconds of whipping them on high, what you want to do is take a little spatula and kind of go down the sides to bring everything back to the bottom, because we're not even close to being where we need to be with this mixture yet. But it's important to scrape down the sides. I advise you to do that probably 3 or 4 times during this mixing process. And you will definitely see the difference when it's all whipped up. It's light and airy and fluffy. It kind of reminds me almost of like whipped cream. It turns very light, so you're not even gonna see the yellow from the butter. It's gonna turn really light color. Okay, that looks good. It is nice and light and fluffy. That's the perfect consistency, okay, for the butter and the sugar. Now real quick, because I think I forgot to say how much sugar was in there. I know I said it was half of a pound, but the half of a pound equaled 1 cup of sugar. But I've tried this recipe a couple of times, and one time it was a cup and a tablespoon. That's why weighing it really is the most accurate way to make the cake. But if you don't have a scale at home, just use 1 cup of white sugar and that'll be fine. Actually, I'm gonna leave this here because we are gonna weigh out our flour as well. Okay, so that's done. Now what we need to do is add in our eggs. You want to add in the eggs one at a time. Now these are 8 ounces or half a pound of eggs with the shell on. And I'm going to add in one at a time. Remember, crack your eggs on a flat surface, not on the edge of the bowl. That will prevent, well, it should have. It didn't. It should prevent getting the shells in there, but not this time. So let's use a little trick that I learned. Use the eggshell itself and go right in, and you'll be able to pull out that little shell. So we got that shell right out of there. That's why I always recommend doing one at a time into the bowl, so you don't have 4 eggs and then your last one you crack a little bit, you get a little bit of shell in there, and it's just a mess to get out. All right, so we're gonna put this 1 egg in, turn the mixer down, and now I'm just gonna mix on low until it's incorporated. It kind of reminds me of making a cream cheese batter for cheesecake right now. That's how it kind of looks. And I also am gonna scrape down the sides as well. All right, that looks pretty good. Let me give it a scrape down and we'll add in the second egg. You're just gonna repeat this process for all 4 of the eggs. Perfect. Okay, that looks absolutely perfect. All the eggs are incorporated. It's very light and fluffy. It looks beautiful. This is such a thick and velvety batter when it's done. It's absolutely gorgeous. Now I'm gonna add in my vanilla extract. This is 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract. It is totally optional. You could add in almond extract if you like, which I think would be delicious. I mean, you could omit it if you like, but I enjoy the little bit of vanilla flavor. It pairs really well with the orange that we're gonna add in a little bit. Now I am using pure vanilla extract, and I really recommend when you're making something that has just such few ingredients that you use the highest quality ingredients that you can. And I think the real vanilla adds a real bonus to this instead of the imitation vanilla extract. So if you can get your hands on some, it is kind of pricey. If not, you can use the imitation as well. It will work. So I'm gonna pour that in and just give this a quick little mix. Perfect. So I have the 4 eggshells here. Now don't throw these away if you are a gardener, because they are so awesome in your garden. And what I do is I just give them a little rinse, and then I put them in the basket of the Ninja Foodi, and I bake them at 250 for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then I just put them in a plastic bag and crush them up, and they are a great addition to your garden. Okay, so now we are going to measure out our flour. Again, I really recommend that you weigh your flour, but if not, I'll give you some rough estimates of the amount of flour that you'll need to put in. I've done this, 2 or 3 times, and it's always a little different, believe it or not. Okay, so I'm gonna put the mixing bowl on the scale and just hit the on button. That's gonna take into account what the weight of the bowl is already, so we don't have to do any calculations, which I love. Now, there is a certain way that if you're gonna measure flour, if you're not gonna weigh it, and that is to get your scoop. This is a 1/4 cup scoop. And then take something that's flat, so you could use a butter knife. Go straight across the top like that, and then we can put it in. So that's a 1/4 cup. So I'm just gonna repeat that. I know this is at least gonna take a cup of flour. So I'm gonna do that with all 4. Now you don't have to do this if you're weighing it. I'm just showing you how to actually get an accurate 1/4 cup or any size cup of flour. I like the Pampered Chef measuring cups because they actually come with this, and it's real handy. I'm gonna do that for 4. Then I'm gonna sift it. Okay. So now they have sifters that you can get, but I just find to use this colander is my favorite. We're gonna aerate this flour. And it looks like fine powdered sugar, actually. Okay, so that's 4.6 ounces, and we want 8. So now I'm gonna do just a quarter at a time. And that's 5.7. So it's 1.5 cups of flour. Usually it's about 1 3/4 cup. Now I'm not going to be able to get enough out, so I'm going to start using 1/2 of a tablespoon. This looks a little clunky, but honestly, it's so easy to do, especially if you're just weighing it out. You just dump it in until it's the right weight. So we're at 7.2. I've added in 1 tablespoon. 4 tablespoons equals 1/4 of a cup. So we might go 1 cup and 2 tablespoons, or even 3 tablespoons. So that's another tablespoon. You might think this is a little ridiculous, and I mean, you don't have to be as specific as I'm being, but a little bit extra flour in a cake can turn it from a rich, buttery pound cake into kind of a floury, I don't know, not so lovely tasting cake. So I take the time to do this to make sure that I get the best results at the end. So now we are at 1 cup and 1 cup and 3 tablespoons. And we're at 7.8 ounces. So it looks like it is going to be 1 cup and 3/4. This go around anyway. Put in that last tablespoon. Make sure I can get it all in there. Okay. .9 ounces. So it is 1 cup, and that is 8 ounces exactly. So 1 cup, 3/4, that's been the go-to about twice. I think one time it was a little short, so I think that'll be a good measurement for you if you don't have a scale. Will be 1 cup and 3/4 cup of flour. Okay, so we've got that done now, and that's the only thing that we have to add into our cake, and we're gonna do it kind of slowly. So I usually use the 1/4 cup and just take a little 1/4 cup, turn the mixer on low, and start to add it in. After about every 1/2 of a cup, I'm going to scrape down the sides again. Ordinarily, I would add salt to almost all of my cakes. However, I use salted butter, and I didn't feel the need to add in salt to the pound cake. But if you want to, you can certainly add in 1/2 of a teaspoon of salt. Okay, that is beautiful. I mean, this cake batter is probably one of the most beautiful cake batters that I've ever made. It is velvety, smooth. It's just got a glorious color. It's beautiful, and it tastes delicious. But you know me, I always like to add that little special something. And today that is going to be grated orange zest. It gives this cake the best flavor. No, you don't have to use it. You could use lemon. In fact, you could use lemon extract if you wanted, and lemon, and make like a lemon pound cake. But I just found that the vanilla and the orange were so delicious in this. So I'm just gonna take the bowl off the mixer here. Go ahead and scrape down all the rest of the batter. Oh, it's just beautiful. Yummy, yummy. All right. And it's also important that you don't overbeat the batter. So as soon as the flour is incorporated, you want to turn off the mixer. You don't want to keep beating it up. All right, so I just have one orange here, and I'm just going to use the Zest. Not measuring, but it does turn out to be probably about, I don't know, a heaping teaspoon, maybe even a half of a tablespoon. But no worries about that. Just zest it in there. You do not have to measure. And I'm just going lightly over the skin. You don't want to go down too far. You don't want to see white. You just want to see the orange part, because if you get down to the white, you're getting into the pith. The pith is very bitter, and you don't want that in your cake. Okay, perfect. Now just fold this in. No need to put it back under the mixer. Just go ahead and just fold it in. And now we get our pan ready. Oh, I just love the way this batter looks. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is get our pan ready. There are a couple things that you need to do to prepare the pan. So I'm gonna get some room temperature butter here and my little silicone basting brush that I use for everything. So I'm just gonna get a little bit of the butter. That's probably about a teaspoon or so. And I'm gonna go all around the pan. And you wanna get all around the pan. So if you're using like a bundt pan, make sure that you get it into all the grooves as well, because you don't want this sticking at the end. So I'm going around the little middle piece too. Now you could make this in a loaf pan, although I have not tried it, so I don't know how long you would pressure cook it or bake it for, but you would need to pressure cook it longer, or put in one of those little inserts, which I've used before, just a biscuit cutter right in the middle, because that will help conduct heat and cook the center. Otherwise, you're gonna end up with overcooked edges and a not cooked center. All right, so about 2 teaspoons of butter. I'm not measuring or anything like that, but I do want to get this nice and coated. Usually I use something called pan grease, which is a mixture of like Crisco and flour and I think oil, and that's my go-to. But because this is a pound cake and you just want it to have that butter flavor, I really just wanted to use straight butter. Now we're not gonna flour this because I don't wanna add any additional flour. But we are gonna do something that is completely optional, but completely delicious. And that is to use some Demerara sugar. So these are very coarse sugar granules that are a lot less processed than white sugar. You could also use what's called sugar in the raw, but they're a little bit smaller. So if you can find the Demerara sugar, I really recommend it for this recipe. It just adds that something special. And this is 3 tablespoons. And I'm just gonna put this in here, and then I'm gonna act like I'm flouring the pan. So I'm just gonna twirl it around and let that sugar build up all around the edges. Not so much in the center, just because there is a risk that this will cause the cake to stick a little bit more, so I don't want it to be on the inside rung as much as down on the bottom and around the sides. And that's what it will look like when you're done. Just let it stick to all that yummy butter. Okay, I've got a little extra here that's not sticking. And if you have that and you can't get it to stick to any more butter, dump it out, okay? You don't want a big glob of the sugar somewhere. All right, that looks perfect. Now let's get our batter into our cake pan. So I like to use this scoop just because I can scoop it out and place it where I want, but you could use the spatula and just kind of pour it in. I just like to try not to get it too much around the top of this inner circle, because what that does is sometimes it'll get stuck there and it's harder for you to get your cake out. Okay, so So there we go. We've got all the cake batter, most of the cake batter. There might be a little bit left in there. And now I'm just gonna go ahead and just kind of smooth it around. All right, perfect. Get every last little bit, right? All right, looks good. Perfect. Okay, so now we're gonna put this on the rack in the low position, and I've got 2 cups of water in the Ninja Foodi. And remember, we're gonna go under pressure, and I'm gonna explain that. I'm gonna show you the differences between the 2 cakes when I baked it and I pressure cooked in just a minute. So I'm gonna put this onto the rack. And this pan is a 7-inch Fat Daddy-O ring mold pan, I think it's called, and I'll link to that below. I also have these little silicone grippers, I guess. I haven't been too happy with them when I cook with any of the functions that use the Tender Crisp lid, because I feel like they just get just as hot as the metal does. But I'm gonna try them out with the pressure cooker and see if it does help me lift out the pan easier. I need to put something on top. I'm gonna use tin foil. I know some people do not like to use tin foil. That is fine. Use parchment paper, but your top of your cake will probably get a little bit wetter with the parchment. We'll get a little bit wetter with the parchment than with the tin foil. So I just put it around here. And what I like to do is kind of go under and tent it up just a little bit, because the cake will rise and I don't want it to cook onto the foil itself. So I'm just gonna kind of tent it. It's impossible to keep all the water out when you're pressure cooking, but I do try to keep as much of it as I can out. All right, that should be good. It's just a little tented there on the top. All right, so we put that in to the Ninja Foodi. Put your pressure lid on. Turn the Ninja Foodi on. We're gonna go to pressure on high, and we're gonna go to 25 minutes. And hit start. Make sure the black valve in the back is to the seal, and then this is gonna come up to pressure pretty quick, probably within 5 to 8 minutes. Definitely it'll come up to pressure. So while that's happening, let me just go ahead and clean this off, and I'm gonna bring over the 2 cakes that already cooked, and I'm gonna explain the difference and what happened with the cakes and why I decided that for this recipe, pressure cooking is the fastest, easiest way to make the cake, and it really results in a nice cake. So I've got my 2 cakes over here. And these are about, I don't know, 3 or 4 days old. They've just been on the counter. They're still perfectly fine. Okay, so this one is the one that I pressure cooked. You can see it's a lot lighter on the top. So what I think I'm gonna do at the end of this pressure cooking is I am going to give the top a little caramelization with the air crisp function, or the bake roast function would work just as well, just to get a little more browning on here. This is the cake that was baked. What happened is it took forever to bake. I mean, the first one I did, it was hysterical, and I really wish I would have gotten a picture because you guys would have really enjoyed seeing this. In 20 minutes, the cake looked like it was perfectly cooked. I put a cake tester in, it came out clean. I thought this was crazy. It defies logic, but this cake would be done in 20 minutes. But the Ninja Foodi is pretty magical. So I thought, well, wow, this will be great. If I can actually bake a pound cake in 20 minutes in the Ninja Foodi, perfect. So I went around the edges, with my cake releaser and everything, and I dumped it out. I mean, it looked beautiful. As I dumped it out, the bottom was cooked, the top was cooked, the middle was completely raw. It just fell and oozed all over the place. It was a complete disaster. I had to throw that away. So I said, I'm gonna try one more time with baking. This was the first one I did, it's pressure cooked. So I went ahead and I baked it again. I started out, I think, at a lower temperature, and because I didn't want it to get too brown. It still got very brown. I had to cover it with foil after about 20 minutes, and then I proceeded to bake it for probably 60 more minutes, and it was still undone in the center. So even after 60 minutes of cooking, it was still undone in parts. And I was pretty disappointed. It also stuck quite a bit because of that sugar we added on. Now, all of those things I could have worked through with further testing and gotten to a point where you could bake the pound cake and it come out fine. However, after doing some blind taste tests with my husband, between the pressure cooked version and the baked version, the differences were so small that the time saved using the pressure cooking function, I felt was worth going ahead with the recipe under pressure cook. It really, it slices beautifully. It's got a beautiful texture. This pressure cooked cake tastes delicious. It was a little bit drier than the baked version. But again, I didn't feel like the time spent was really worth baking. Because again, it's going to take you probably almost 90 minutes to get this one done. And it just wasn't as accurate as this one. So what I've done in this recipe now, because I made this like 4 or 5 times, is I've decreased the time from 30 minutes to 25 minutes. And I'm going to go with a longer natural release. I did 30 minutes pressure cook and 15 minutes natural release on this cake. I'm gonna do 25 with a 20-minute natural release on this new cake. I'm thinking that that's going to bump up the moisture a little bit so it's not as dry, and I think we're gonna get closer to this cake in the moisture content, which this one was a little bit better. As far as that's concerned. But all told, I am going to recommend that you pressure cook, save some time. This would be delicious served with, any kind of fruit and some whipped cream. It's delicious eaten by itself, really. And also, it's perfect if you want to make a chocolate fondue. So it will hold up under that. It's not going to crumble apart, which is the purpose of a pound cake. It's not supposed to crumble. All right, so we'll just wait for this to cook, and then we'll finish up our recipe, and we'll get to tasting it. So our pound cake cooked for 25 minutes under high pressure, and then I allowed it to natural release for 20 minutes, well actually 22 minutes now. And what happened at about minute 16 is all the pressure was released, so the button's down, so we don't have to do that manual release because it totally released all the pressure. However, leave it in there for the full 20 minutes, okay, before taking it out. That's gonna help finish up cooking the inside of our cake. All right, so just take the pressure lid off. Let the steam sort of go away. Now I'm going to test this out so that you don't have to. I'm going to see how hot are these silicone things here. Well, once I get the steam out, because the steam can be really hot and it can burn you, so be super careful. So once that dissipates, I'm going to try to pick up the rack just using these things, which I think is going to be possible. So that's kind of cool. Now they are hot a little bit, okay? I mean, I could feel them getting a little bit uncomfortable just in that short distance, but all in all, pretty good. They'll cool off very quickly. That's what silicone does. Again, I didn't like it in the air fryer or any of the tender crisp lid functions. I didn't like using these. They just took too long to cool off. But under pressure, they seem to work pretty well, so I'm kind of happy with that. All right, so now let's carefully get our tin foil off of our cake here. Good. Now don't worry about the way the top looks. You're not even gonna ever see that, okay? So now what I'm gonna do is, it seems like it got a little wetter. I think I should have had a bit more of a seal around the edges. All right, but it looks good. It's released from the edges some. I'm just taking my little cake tester and going around just to make sure everything is released. And it looks like it has released. Very good. Now, you want this to cool for about 5 to 10 minutes in the pan, and then we're gonna turn it upside down on the rack, and we're gonna get it in there just for that little bit of crisping up to brown up the outside. Okay, so it's been about 5 or 7 minutes, and now I'm going to flip the cake out. Now, I'm not gonna do it directly on the rack. I mean, you can, but what I've found with the rack, because of the way these little the way the design is with these little protrusions here, it's just kind of makes it a little cumbersome to just dump it right onto the rack. So I'm going to go ahead and put it onto my cooling rack and then transfer it to the rack. Again, that's just my preference. So I'm just going to put the rack on top, grab it, and flip it. then what I like to do is just give it a little beat. Just to sort of knock it down. And then we lift it off. If you meet resistance, I've got to take these off to do this. If you meet resistance, and it is still hot, then you can always, oh gosh, isn't that beautiful? You can always flip it back over, kind of go around with the cake tester again. But this is just beautiful. Oh, it looks great. Wow. So we've got that sugar, I can see it. Oh, it just looks so pretty. Now, what I'm gonna do, just because, you know, under pressure, you put a lot of moisture into the cake. And I don't wanna dry the cake out, but I do wanna get it like a little golden brown. This is an optional step. You do not need to do this. If you decide to stop here, just let it cool for about an hour or so before you slice it. But I'm gonna go ahead and go that extra step. Put this underneath here to lift it up. And then I can sort of get these up so that they don't gouge into the cake and sort of slide the cake in. Perfect. All right, looks beautiful. So I'm just gonna go back into the Ninja Foodi and I'm gonna use the bake roast. I mean, you could use the air crisp, it doesn't really matter. But I'm gonna use the bake roast and I'm gonna go up to 400 and just hit start. Now it's not gonna go for 15 minutes. Maybe 5. I'm just looking for a little browning of that sugar, a little browning of the top of the cake, and to remove some of that moisture. We're gonna develop like a crust. So you know how a really good pound cake has that nice crust that's just a little bit crunchy, but then the inside is just soft and buttery tasting? Well, that's what we're going for with this extra little step. Let's see if it works. So it's been about 7 minutes and I did check it at about 3 minutes and 5 minutes, and it turned out that 7 minutes was the right amount of time to get that browning and that little crystallization of the sugar on top. So now I'm gonna pull it out. Now, again, I can't touch these after baking or roasting. They're just too hot, so I need to use my gloves to get the pan out. Oh, wow, isn't that beautiful? Oh, that looks so good. And so now where we had a really soft exterior, we have just a little bit firmer, a little bit crunchier of an exterior, which I love on a pound cake. All right, so I'm just gonna get this kind of carefully. The pound cake is hot too. Okay, there we go, perfect. All right, so now we need to let that cool for about 30 minutes to an hour. Now you could cut into it right now, but anytime you make a cake or bread, I always recommend giving it a cooling period of time before you cut into it, unless of course it's a lava cake, and then if you eat those right away. But so we're gonna let this cool for about an hour and then we'll slice into it. I'll let you see what the texture is on the inside and I'll give it a taste. All right, now for the big reveal. So the cake has cooled and I'm just gonna put it on this plate here and give it a little slice and a little taste. It looks beautiful. Oh, it looks perfect. That looks great. Looks like the right texture for a pound cake. Look, you see the orange zest in there? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, the smell is amazing. So let's give it a taste. This is a really, really good, easy pound cake to make. It would be so perfect with blueberries and a little bit of whipped cream. The texture is great. I love the little hint of sugar that you get on the top. Absolutely delicious. So be sure to give this one a try. Oh! So this is a tip. Whenever you see me come back onto camera smiling or maybe even chuckling a little bit, something happened just like that. Oh. Okay, perfect.